Okay, you guys are now live on YouTube.
Okay.
So you could just say hello and say about what you're going to be doing.
I've never been on YouTube before live. So this is a new experience for me. What about you? Have you been on YouTube live, Sanghadhara?
No, on this side of the camera, to be honest. I'm usually behind the camera.
So what have you done YouTube live behind the camera?
Well, it was Sanghadhara's funeral. And a couple of talks. I think I tried to do a talk from Adhisthana live. I think that's it. I've only been live a couple of times. But yeah, never on this side of the camera. Well, welcome if you're joining. There's no way of us knowing.
You're a bit early if you are joining, but anyway, welcome.
Let's have a look. Let me try to find the. I know we said we wouldn't.
What?
I'm gonna look for a stream to see.
Okay.
Sandeep is with us, joining.
Yeah. Hello, Sandeep. Welcome.
You can see it, can you, on YouTube?
I can, yeah.
I'll
show you.
And is it the same here? We got a picture of me, a picture of you, and then a picture of the Buddha underneath. Is it the same?
Yep. No, we cannot see the Buddha actually.
Just you and I.
Yeah, it's just you and me.
Can you hear us, Vijaypala, talking?
Yep.
So you're with us still.
Yeah, good. So your people can see you, and
And are you able to tell us? Is anybody watching yet?
Yeah, Sandeep is here. There's some other people joining.
Some of the people joining in already. Oh, right. Well, we should be
very meta. That's how we look like, Ratnaguna.
Yes. Yeah. Good. I'm glad we were in the same top.
That's true. Why so you?
Yeah, welcome everybody as you're joining us. We can't see you, so we've got no idea how many of you there are or what you look like or anything, but welcome.
Tell me, Ratnaguna, how are you doing? How's your lockdown experience so far?
I'm afraid my lockdown experience has been marvelous. I've been loving it because I like solitude anyway, and I've been on my own a lot, but I usually am on my own quite a lot. And the weather's been great, of course, on the whole, and I've been going for a long walk every day on my own, of course. But yeah, I've used the time really well. I've been listening to a lot of music, discovering a lot of music, and I've been reading quite a bit and writing talks and giving talks online. So I wouldn't say I've been busy, but I've been fairly occupied and very happy. And what about you? How's your lockdown experience been? I'm wondering with you because I think you're an extrovert, and you like being with people. So I'm wondering how it's been for you.
Am I an extrovert? Let me ponder about it. I've been pretty, well, I mean, I don't live on my own. I live with other friends, and I think that's been, it's been very good. Actually, it's been, usually I have to travel quite a bit. I travel a lot for meetings or.
You certainly do travel a lot.
I don't think I've been in one place for such a long time, for years. And to start with, actually, I welcomed it with open arms, really. And I took on house projects. I've been redecorating, painting walls, and and also just using the time to deepen my communication and friendship with people I live with, because even though I live with them, I travel a lot, and my friendships tend to be quite spread. So it's been good to kind of engage more with people I live with. Not that we don't, but we've been doing more in a way because we've been more together. And it's been very nice, actually. It felt like, actually, it was quite rocky the first couple of weeks in terms of communication, but it felt like that brought about deeper and truer harmony in a way. It feels more harmonious.
You had a period of storming before you could become forming. Yeah. Exactly. No, forming then storming, isn't it? And then it's performing, I think. Yeah. So are you performing now, your community?
But now I'm getting bored, so probably maybe it's time for another little storm with people I live with.
Yeah. Well, I don't live with anyone, so I haven't had any of that process. It's just me every day.
Don't you get on arguments with yourself?
No, never. No. Me and you get on really well together.
Oh,
yeah,
that's good.
Yeah. We had all our arguments years ago, and we decided it wasn't worth bothering anymore, so we didn't.
Yeah, you got tired of it.
Yeah, just get fed up with arguing yourself all the time, don't you? So, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So, well, we've still got a little while. Yeah, one of the things I've been listening to is I'm on a classical streaming company and classical music streaming, and there's only certain sorts of music that sound good through my hearing aids, and violins unfortunately don't. So orchestras are more or less, they don't work. So I've been trying to find music which sounds really good, and percussion sounds really good. Drums and anything you hit, like marimbas and xylophones, they all sound really, really good. Cymbals. Piano sounds pretty good depending on the recording. The more modern recordings, the piano sounds really good. Older recordings, not so good. Harpsichord on the whole sounds good. But I've discovered a couple of instruments. The organ sounds really good. And I've never listened to organ music. It's never really appealed to me. But I'm now listening to organ music, Buxtehude from Denmark. And it's really, it feels like a whole new world has opened up to me of music, which I'd kind of decided not to go into. But now I am because of my hearing. So, yeah, it's been really, really good. Yeah, at the moment, I can't get enough of Buxtehude's organ music, just listening to loads of it.
Wow. What is your what's your favorite composer then?
Oh, I don't really have favorite composers. I have someone I get into, like I'm really into Buxtehude at the moment. I'm not sure he's my favorite. I like Scarlatti and Bach and Haydn and Beethoven. Funny enough, I'm not very keen on Mozart. I don't know why. When I listen to some music, it doesn't really touch me in the way that Haydn really does. Yeah, taste. Yeah. Have you got into anything particular? What have you been on lockdown, apart from what you said, practice and community and painting?
Actually, I ordered some books that just arrived yesterday. So I'm now looking forward to getting to reading. Oh, actually, I was reading Philip Pullman's Book of Dust.
Oh, is that good? Is that good?
It's good, but it was really dark. He even calls them his darker materials.
Oh.
They're quite, quite gloomy, and they just kind of get more and more tense. And so I put that aside at the moment. I guess I wanted some. Yeah, I just noticed I was just getting stressed. It's not where I wanted to be imaginatively.
And the new books that have come, what are they?
Actually, they're all by Windhurst Publications. Plug in is the Dark Side of the Mirror by David Blazer. And there's another book by Analio on disease and death, sickness and death, which is really good. I was reading it a couple of years ago. I mean, I'm a fan of Anali as well. So it's very, because it does translate and compares texts from their Chinese and their Pali text. And so it's basically 24 chapters, 12 on sickness and
you just froze.
Each chapter is
12 on sickness and 12 on what?
On death.
Ah.
So you get fantastic little suttas and their equivalent on the agamas, and just little stories. It's a great way of getting little stories, translation and comparing translations. And so I actually didn't finish it because I think I was reading it while I was at Gukyaloka, and I decided to leave it there for the library. So I just bought myself another copy so I can finish it. And reflecting on sickness and death seems appropriate. Well, always appropriate, but
always appropriate. Very topical at the moment.
Yeah, it's just I can see that Aryajit has just joined.
Who has?
From London. Aryajit.
Oh, Aryajit's joined, does he? Oh.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know that?
I still have the little YouTube feed.
But you can't. But when I go onto YouTube, nobody knows I'm watching YouTube. It doesn't come up. Hey.
Oh, it's because he said hi.
Hey.
He said hello. He
sent
a little text.
Hello, Aryajit. Hope you're well.
Yeah. Are you reading it? You said you were reading as well. What are you reading?
Oh, I'm reading a few things. I'm reading a book about fear, about generalized fear in our culture at the moment, by a guy called Frank Furedi. He's a very interesting man, and tracing how societies deal with fear. And he reckons our current society deals with it very badly. And this is very topical now, of course, because a lot of people are very frightened of the coronavirus, and he's got things to say about that. So that's been very good. I just finished Hilary Mantel's trilogy on Thomas Cromwell, Wolf Hall, etc.
Oh yeah.
But I found that quite hard going. I failed to see all the fuss about that trilogy, like a masterpiece and work of genius. I thought it was okay, but couldn't quite see what all the fuss was about. I was reading a book about Gerard Manley Hopkins, the Victorian priest and poet. It's called Hopkins, the Self and God. And I must have read maybe a third of it, but I more or less decided not to carry on. It's not that relevant and interesting to me. Yeah. Yes. So how are we doing for time? 3 o'clock. Are we supposed to start dead on time, do you know, or do we wait?
You could start. We've currently got about 15 people who are watching, and I'm sure other people will join us. So if you wanted to make a start, feel free to do so. Yeah,
as they've got here on time, why should they wait? Okay, good. Welcome, 15 people. You're very welcome, whoever you are. We know one of you is Aryajit, who I know. So our task today, Sanghadhara, is to talk about the Buddha, isn't it? To introduce him to people who may not know very much about him, and for those people who do know about him, to maybe give them a bit more knowledge. And we decided we got 2 days, haven't we, today and tomorrow, and we decided earlier, didn't we, that today we talk about the Buddha before he was the Buddha, and tomorrow we talk about the Buddha after his Buddhahood. But probably we should start. There could be some people who don't know very much about the Buddha at all. So Sanghadhara, why don't you tell us just a little bit about him? Where did he live? When did he live? What kind of guy he was, etc.
Yeah. So the person that we call the Buddha was a person, historical human. He was born in what he was North India, about 2,500 years ago. Yeah, so he was a human being. He wasn't the son of a god or a messiah, but he was very much a human being like everyone else. Yeah, I said in the north of India. I think what now is part of Nepal. Is that correct?
I don't know.
I think so. Yeah, I think in Lumbini. Well, I don't think it's Indian. Well, you can still go and visit. And yeah, so some people think that he's Chinese. Sometimes some people think he's a god. Well, no, he wasn't. He wasn't a god. And I think that places Buddhism into a very different, to a different place than other religions or even philosophical traditions, I suppose, where someone is basically very much a human, but also it was more than a human. It became more than a human. It became an enlightened human being, which we will explore a bit later.
Yeah, we will. So,
well, maybe just say a bit about how humans work. Oh, did I freeze?
No, I think we might be slightly at different time zones, because I started speaking a few seconds before you noticed I started. I don't know why that is. I wanted to ask you, you said he's not the son of a god. Did he believe in God then? Did he think there was a creator God?
Actually, it's one of the things that, well, back then, there wasn't an understanding as we do of like one God. I suppose India at that time, there was a multiplicity of gods. And I think it's one of those questions where he refused to, he wasn't that interested in talking about how the world and the universe started. He was more interested in the alleviation of suffering. I think what started his spiritual quest, his spiritual inquiry, perhaps. It was very much the realization that in his life, in his human life, he experienced pain. He experienced that he was subject of sickness, of old age, and death, and that I think that troubled him in an existential way, to see that there was nothing that he could, that he was looking for security, that it wasn't also subject of sickness and death. His family, his career, his structures, and perhaps even his notion of, or the cultural notion back then of the multiplicity of gods, that wasn't giving him any rest, any freedom from that. Almost kind of what I imagine almost an existential crisis that brought about to his experience. So yeah, so I wouldn't say that he didn't deny that the world was created by a god. Perhaps he would have challenged that would have been the place and the objects or the beings to devote oneself.
It's interesting, because I was just reading this morning about, I can't remember now whether it was Epictetus or Epicurus, one of those ancient Greek philosophers who didn't deny that gods existed, but he said that they've got nothing to do with us. They live in the God realm. They don't have anything to do with us, so we don't need to bother with them. And perhaps the Buddha's attitude is a bit like that. Maybe we should say a little bit about what we've been talking about the Buddha before he was the Buddha, although we haven't actually started that yet. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about the Buddha after he was a Buddha. We could leave, actually we could leave Buddhahood out till tomorrow, and then we can tell people what that is, couldn't we?
Yeah.
And very often around this time, this is on Saturday, it's a big day for Buddhists, of course. We're celebrating Buddha Day, which is the day traditionally the Buddha got enlightened. And so we always tell the same story of his life, you know, leading up to that and what he did and so on. And you've given the very early parts of that, when he realized that, you know, there was suffering around, there was old age, there was disease and death, and everyone was subject to it, including him. And he was not happy with that situation. So he tried to find a way out of that. And we'll talk tomorrow more about that way out. But one of the things I've been very interested with the Buddha is the more quieter things he said himself about his life. So once he was the Buddha and he had lots of disciples, sometimes he'd just sit around with some of his close disciples who probably were close friends of his as well. And he would just tell them about what it was like for him before he was the Buddha. And I really love those, because it's like you get a little glimpse into the man, the person. Well, because very often you get this big heroic man who's going through life and, you know, overcoming obstacles and so on. But we nowadays don't really believe that. We think there must be something more to a person than this godlike person. So I really like those episodes where he says, oh, you know, what it was like for me before. And one of them came about, he was just talking about, I don't know who he was talking to actually, but he said, yeah, well, before I was enlightened, before I became the Buddha, I noticed in my own self, in my own mind, that there were basically two kinds of thought. There was thought based around greed and hatred and so on. And there was thought based around the opposites of those, generosity, contentment and love and so on. And he said, I noticed that if I got into the dark side, the greed and hatred and the cruelty and so on, if I thought about those things, it really didn't do me any good. I became very unhappy and felt less free. But when I was thinking about the good things like love and contentment and generosity and things, that had a really good effect on me. So I noticed that. But what I really like about that episode was when he then went on to say, but even when I thought a lot about the good things of life. When I say the good things of life, I mean positive mental states. When I was in positive mental states of generosity and so on, and thinking along those lines, even then, I noticed that when I thought too much, I got really tired. And so then what I did after that was I thought, okay, time to stop thinking now. And I would, speaking of the Buddha here, I would then just stop thinking and rest my mind in stillness, which is a lovely metaphor for meditation, I think. So there's negative thoughts, which don't lead anywhere good. There's positive thoughts, which do lead somewhere good. But if you do too much of it, it's tiring. So you also have to have time outside of thought, which is a lovely kind of Buddhist idea. But it wasn't so much the idea as the way he went about it that really interested me. It was like he was almost, not exactly, but something like scientific in thinking, wait a minute, when that happens, this happens. And when that happens, that happens. But then after that, this happens. I just thought that was really interesting, the kind of person the Buddha was. So, yeah, that's the kind of things I like about the Buddha before he was the Buddha.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that in relation to meditation is one of the things I try to find my way into, whether it's to cultivate mindfulness or metta or positive mental states, or loving kindness, as we call it, is with it's trying to cultivate almost that curiosity, which I think, you know, that the Gautama just seemed to naturally have. Not just the capacity to observe or to go deeper and to inquire, to try to notice even deeper what it was actually happening.
Yeah, that's interesting. So very often, I think people tend to think that to follow the Buddha, you just have to follow him, almost slavishly, you know, do what he did. And there's a certain amount of truth in that, but also I think if we are really going to follow the Buddha, we also need to follow the Buddha in the way he thought about things, and is an inquiring mind. You know, does that work? Because the Buddha said such and such works, right? He said this works if you do this. Well, your job now is not just to do it slavishly, but see if it does work, really does work for you, and just do the same as the Buddha. Well, what happens when you do that?
Yeah. I'm noticing also kind of from that little story, the tone in which things happened, or he observed things happening. So you often hear that meditation is about stopping thoughts, and people sometimes say, hey, I cannot meditate because my mind just cannot stop, would not shut up, and therefore I'm not meditating. Well, actually, what he noticed is more of it was more like curiosity of the kind of thoughts and the consequences of the kind of thoughts he was having. And then was noticing that it was tiring, or maybe that it wasn't useful. You know, he wanted to be happy. He wanted, you know, he didn't want negative thoughts because it was making him unhappy, and positive thoughts were being positive. But then he realized there was a level of energy, of engagement in the mind, that he could kind of step back more naturally. So it was more of he gave them up, or renounced, or moved into a different way of engaging, as opposed to trying to stop the mind, negatives and positive thoughts. So how he cultivated, or how he arrived to concentration, it was more out of a gentle curiosity and dropping things, or renouncing things. Renouncing is not a very popular word, but I suppose it's a relaxing. Relaxing.
Growing out of them. Yeah, there's another nice story where somebody comes up to him, a guy called Mahanama, who's a very good disciple of the Buddha. And Mahanama comes up to him and he says, oh, you know, you said that we're supposed to renounce sensual pleasures. And I find I can't. I've been trying for years. I just can't do it. And the Buddha said, yeah, I was just like that when I was a young man as well, before I became the Buddha. I really love that fact that, you know, he's just so human in a way. He says, yeah, I know, I was like that too. He says, and I was like that until I really got into meditation. And then when I got into meditation, it became really, really enjoyable. So enjoyable that I didn't really need those sensual pleasures anymore. So this relates to what you said about renunciation. We in our culture, renunciation is a bit of a not very good word, because it feels like not allowing yourself to have the pleasures of life for some religious reason. But what the Buddha shows in that incident is that actually, no, the spiritual life is one of pleasure, but it's a different pleasure. I mean, we Buddhists would say a better pleasure than sensual pleasures. But you can't renounce pleasure completely, because you need pleasure in your life. You just need that. And if you're not getting it from your meditation, of course, you're going to try and have sensual pleasures. Nothing wrong with that. But if you can get into your meditation, then you find there's a different kind of pleasure. What's interesting about that different kind of pleasure is that it comes from yourself, not from anything outside. And so it's more dependable in a way, or it could be more dependable. Yeah. Do you relate to that idea?
Yeah. Also just thinking of the difference between like renunciation, and renounce something is not repress something. I think it's one of the connotations that can come with the word, in my mind, the negative connotations with the renunciation.
Yeah, indeed.
I just thought I'd make people aware that, you know, in about 10 minutes or so, we also take questions. So if you want to start thinking of questions or comments, you can also start writing them in the comments, and Vidya Palo, someone will make us aware of them. So we're not looking at the comments right now. We'll do a bit later. Anyway, leaving that aside.
Perhaps another thing.
I thought let me ask you, because you already mentioned a couple of stories of the Buddha. Anyway, like how do you do you relate with the Buddha as an actual human being? Can you see him as a human being, and what, if so, in what kind of way, or what do you see of yourself that it was similar to Gautama's experience?
Well, I definitely relate to him as a human being. I read a fair bit of what's called the Pali Canon, which is the most ancient texts where he's in them all, you know, and teaching. But not only does he teach in those texts, he acts as well. You can watch his behavior, the way he is with people, like with that Mahanama chap, and him just saying, yeah, I was like that too. And there's quite a few incidents like that where you really get into the Buddha's humanity. So yeah, the Buddha was a human. That's how I see him. And I mean, my teacher wouldn't be particularly happy with that, Sanghadhara. He said, no, the Buddha was more than human. And I tried to see him as more than human, but to be honest, I don't. I see him as a really, really wise human being. And there's another story I want to tell, which is very well known, but I want to bring out something that perhaps hasn't been brought out enough, is before he was the Buddha, he tried all sorts of things, didn't he? He had teachers, probably traditional Hindu teachers, I don't know, who taught him how to meditate and so on. And he went as far as he could with them, and he thought there was further to go. And so he left one, and then he went, saw another one, left that one. And he felt he was getting somewhere, but it was like a glass ceiling he couldn't get above. So there was another big strand of spiritual practice in India in those days, which was what was called the ascetic practices, which is where the idea being that you, somehow your spirit or your soul is trapped inside the body, and you have to liberate it from the body. And to do that, you have to really be bad to the body. You have to really make the body hurt. So he did 6 years of these practices, you know, the famous one of lying on a bed of nails to sleep, starving himself, you know, fasting for a long, long, long time. So he got really, really thin, sitting in the midday sun above him in India, remember, and fires on it all over around him. So he's within these fires, a bit like you were earlier today after you were doing some work and you got really hot. And so he was like really, really, really hot. And he did all those things thinking that that would be the way to gain enlightenment. And after 6 years, he realized it wasn't. So I really liked that episode, because it was like 6 years going down the blind alley. You know, it was a big mistake. And he realized it was a mistake. And he came to the end of that period, and he had 5 other guys who he was doing it with, and he realized it was a mistake and they didn't, so they left him. So there he was, and he said, so what shall I do now? You know, and then he remembered, it was like a spontaneous memory just came to his mind as being a child. I don't know how old he was. He was a child again, and he was with his dad. And the traditional story, the one we get told, is that his dad was farming, he was ploughing a field, but actually there's nothing of that in the text. What it does say in the text, which I find really interesting, is that his dad was occupied. He was with his dad, but his dad wasn't giving him any attention, he was doing something else. And so I think that left him kind of free, his mind just wandered. And he naturally got into a really pleasant state. Just really, I don't know, pleasant, enjoyable, no worries kind of thing. And he remembered that after these 6 years of austerities, and he thought, that's very interesting. I think that might be the way to go. And what he left out the previous 6 years was the pleasure of the spiritual life. And my teacher, or our teacher, Sanghadhara, talks about using an idea from Freud of the reality principle and the pleasure principle. I think this is really important, actually, that religious people often try to follow the reality principle. You know, they're trying to see things as they really are. They're trying to understand. Perhaps philosophers are like that too. But you mustn't forget, it has to be enjoyable. Because if it's not enjoyable, if you're not enjoying it, you'll just dry up. You'll just have to give up one day, because you won't get anywhere. So maybe there are two different kinds of people. There are those people who go too much to the reality principle and not enough pleasure. And there's other people who go to the pleasure principle and not enough reality. I don't know. But getting the middle way between those two, I think that's really tremendous. And I thought that was really, really interesting that the Buddha did that for so long and then realized he made a mistake.
Do you think there's any kind of contemporary or modern equivalent to those extreme practices which might which we might beg a kind of a promise that it did back in the Buddha, in Gautama's life, you know, that's kind of extreme practices. So those extreme practices that
I don't know. Do you got any ideas?
No, I'm trying to think, but actually, I can't think of anything such extreme and physical. I mean, the idea behind it was more like, you know, the notion was more like we are spiritual beings that happen to have a body, a corporeal existence. So
I think I see where you're coming from now. Yeah,
if we made that body thinner, then our spirit would come more brighter, of our soul or something, and therefore the truth would be clearer to us, or for us, to us.
I think dualistic thinking, basically, that the body is bad and the spirit is good, or the soul is good. Is that what you've got in mind? Yeah.
Well, I was trying to think of something even more relatable. Like, one of the things I've noticed is that when people think of the spiritual life, or when they hear I'm a Buddhist, they ask me, why don't you go to far away, or the mountains, or these retreats which are like just 10 days of not silence, not moving. So actually it's not quite lying in the sun with 5 fires in the midday. But I mean, there's kind of a spiritual versions where we sometimes look for a spiritual intense experience, and not even perhaps in a spiritual way. Sometimes it's like maybe you're just thinking in an intense yoga session, or now even thinking of I don't know if this is true, but like now there's gadgets which you can use to monitor your brain as you meditate. So then you can register how concentrated you're getting. So therefore now concentration is becoming almost as a competitive sports.
That's interesting. I can't quite see a connection with that and the ascetic practices. There may be one. I'm just looking at the time, and it's 25 past. Should we? Maybe there's one more thing we could talk about. Is there anything else in the Buddha's life before he was the Buddha that you would like to talk about?
No, I guess I was just, the only thing because sometimes I ask myself the question, like, how much do I actually see him as a human being, and therefore can I have the experience that he had? I don't know, because sometimes he feels quite far away, enlightenment in a way. Sometimes, but you know, while I do what you do more often, which is reading the text, I can definitely see someone, a human being. I think one of those things of yesterday, I guess I'll say this example. Yesterday, I was in the Sydney Buddhist Centre, Young Buddhist, you know, another Zoom arrangement, and we were looking at Kate Tempest's poem on Hold Your Own. Don't know if you've seen this poem. It's a great poem. I'll send it to you later. And halfway through the poem, Kate says, "Stop craving. Please let me stop craving." And it's this kind of realization of, which I think is related with that, with the little first story you told about the Buddha's observation of thoughts, which that can be tiring. Sometimes it's just like the recognition of actually that craving, that constant looking for or wanting for, it's not just tiring, but actually there is an inherent, well, it comes with dissatisfaction, and that dissatisfaction is kind of tiring, painful. So I can definitely relate with that. The Buddhists I can imagine the Buddha just actually started his quest for truth and etc. Is that wanting to free himself from that craving, from that hatred, from ignorance. And I can definitely resonate with that. And anyway, in that poem, I was just like, I remember when I heard it for the first time, and Kate says, "Stop craving." It's almost like the ideal. Stop craving.
Yeah. And that's almost like you've frozen for
that.
That's almost like a very nice invitation, isn't it? It's not like an order. It's like, stop craving now. No, that's not going to work. But why don't you just stop? Life would be much better if you just stopped.
Yeah. Also, just like a bit more of for me, that it kind of, I just think that who is she asking for permission or for help?
Yeah.
Is that kind of, is this something that is beyond personal, that is beyond, it's transpersonal, it's beyond personal experience and or even will, but is that kind of uplifting and almost transcendental, I suppose, the recognition of something.
That's very interesting, because the way we've been talking, it almost sounds like, at least what I've said, it almost like sounds like the Buddha was a kind of a philosopher. But I think it was more than that. And perhaps we can make sure we talk about that tomorrow. I think you said today, at some point today, you said the Buddha was more than human and more than human. And I think today we've spoken about his humanity, which is what we should do, because we're talking about him before he became the Buddha. When he became the Buddha, something happened, didn't it? Important happened, which made him, he was still human, but he also transcended humanity at the same time. So let's talk about that tomorrow. And it's past.
Yeah.
We could ask if anyone's got any questions, and if anyone hasn't got any questions, you and I could just carry on talking. But let's see, Vijaypala, are there any questions yet?
There are. So we've got about 25, 26, 27 people with us, and there's been a number of questions.
Okay, I thought you said 25 or 26, 27 questions.
No. So there's a couple of questions from a lady called Juliet. So the first question is just a technical one. She was just after the name of the disciple who met the Buddha. Earlier on, you were speaking about the Buddha talking to a disciple, just that person's name and how you spell their name.
Okay.
That was her first question. She had a second question, which was, what are the steps you need to take to find a spiritual teacher? You were talking about your own teacher, and she was wondering what the steps are, or what are the steps to finding a spiritual teacher? That was another question.
Okay. Well, I'll have to answer the first question, obviously. So his name was Mahanama, 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 Mahama, and he was a really interesting man. He was really good at asking the Buddha questions. So if you go onto a site like Access to Insight, which has got loads of the Pali text in there, if you just type in Mahanama in the little search box, you get a number of texts when Mahanama's there, and he asks the Buddha some really good questions. He's really good like that, so it's worth following him up. The other question, do you want to tackle that, or should I, Sanghadhara?
The steps to finding a teacher.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting one. I've never thought of this, but on top of my head, I guess I can think of I thought someone like ideally that is obviously wiser. if there could be such a thing, someone that understands better the truth, seem to embody or exemplify that. But sometimes I remember Sangharakshita talking and in his commentary of the Golden Light Sutra, he talks about like in the absence of a teacher, what you really need are also spiritual friends, someone who you share ideals with, you could be honest and open, but also they can challenge. And you know, being helpful doesn't just mean agreeing with you and say there when the things are bad, but also to correct when there's wrong views or where there is unskillful behavior. So yeah, I was just thinking of those qualities where perhaps are those of, I can think more of the qualities of a spiritual friend, I suppose, more than what a teacher means. And sometimes actually some teachers can do that through books or talks, even though you might not know them personally. They can challenge you. I think a good book or a good talk I can relate with, but can also challenge me. So that's some of the things that I can think of.
I'll just add something to that, which is I came across a really good concept a little while ago. I think it might be from the Christian tradition. At least I got it from an ex-Christian. It was the difference between extrinsic authority and intrinsic authority. And extrinsic authority is that somebody's got authority because somebody gave it to them. Like we could take the example of the Pope. The Pope is the Pope, and everybody thinks he's a wonderful, well, not everybody, but Catholics probably all think he's a wonderful and spiritual man because he's the Pope. But most people don't know him. And it's the same in the Buddhist tradition with the Dalai Lama. He's supposed to be a almost enlightened being. And he looks really good, doesn't he, on telly and so on. He comes across as really well, so he might be. But you never know until you know someone. And that's where intrinsic authority comes from. And that's much more important than extrinsic authority. So you need to get to know someone, basically. Before you can consider anyone your teacher, you need to get to know them a bit and find out about them, not by asking questions, but just by being around them, really. So it's quite hard to find a spiritual teacher in that respect. But yeah, I would say remember that distinction. Extrinsic authority doesn't mean say they've got intrinsic authority. And the other way around might work as well. Someone might have a bad reputation, but when you get to know them, you think, well, I don't know why they got a bad reputation. They seem really wise and kind to me. So, you know, as the Buddha often said, go by your own experience of somebody. Hopefully that's helpful.
Would you say then that the Buddha, a teacher of yours, so I went a bit weird on time. Would you say the Buddha is a teacher of yours? And if so, how did you realize this? How did you come to phrase this?
Well, I suppose I was like many people. I wasn't particularly looking for a teacher, a spiritual teacher. I kind of stumbled across Buddhism, mainly through meditation. I wanted to learn how to meditate. Went to a Buddhist center, learned how to meditate, liked the people, wanted to stick around them. But, you know, bit by bit, I got into Buddhism. And I don't know when I considered him to be my teacher, but I definitely do now. Yeah. But it was organic. It wasn't thought through, you know. Very, very few people, you know, think, right, I'm going to take a spiritual teacher. Let's look at all the spiritual teachers in the world and find out which one's for me. I don't suppose anybody really does that. Yeah. It's like you don't, if you want to get married, you don't think, right, who's the best woman in the world? You meet someone and you think, oh, I like her. She'll be fine. Yeah, I'm sure she'll be a great wife. So, you know, you ask to marry her. Well, maybe you don't, but I did. And, you know, you don't want the best in the world. You just want someone who suits you and works well with you and so on. So, yeah. Anyway, we better move on. There's probably other questions, aren't there?
There is some other questions. So we've got a question from Sandeep, and she's asked, how do you think Gautama, so the Buddha before he became the Buddha, would have responded to the current pandemic?
Before he was the Buddha? I've got no idea. You got any ideas, Sanghadhara? While you're thinking, I'll just say one thing, which is,
I don't know. I think,
what? Do you want to say something?
well, I guess, I was just thinking, the first, before he left the comfort of his houses, palaces or houses, and started to go into the spiritual path, as it were, and the quest for truth. In a way, what he saw, it was a close encounter with death and with sickness. So in a way, his response was actually looking for truth. He was looking for, focused, changed the direction of his life towards his highest ideals, or the possible highest ideals, as to walk to the horizon of enlightenment, as sometimes we talk. So it was changing the course of his life. So it was more of actually noticing what was happening, and in response to that, he decided to change his life. Now, what would that mean? If he would have been in the middle of busy Manchester, how would he change his life? I don't know. It's not like the spiritual path is not in the wandering of the streets of Manchester. Perhaps he would have tuned into spiritual teachers going live or something on Facebook or YouTube. I don't know. But basically, what I can notice is that he faced what was happening, also trying to respond and change his life accordingly.
Yeah. Okay. You've frozen again, so there we go.
All right.
Okay, I think, I could say more, but I think Sanghadhara's probably said enough on that one. Any other questions?
It wasn't really a question, but there was a point made by Arya G. I think it's Arya G.
Yeah, it is.
He was making the point that he was wondering whether the modern day equivalent to asceticism is thinking fun isn't spiritual, sex is bad, etc. I wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, it goes back to, I was going to say something earlier about dualistic thinking, but we moved on. But yeah, I think that's the big problem with the spiritual path, is people think very dualistically, and they think that spiritual is good and matter is bad. So it's the opposite of scientific materialism, really, isn't it? Where materialism usually is understood as kind of physicalism. All there is the physical, and therefore all good can only come out of physical. Whereas people tend to see the spiritual life as being the opposite of that. The physical is all bad because there's death and disease and so on. So what's good about it? And the spiritual life is good. But that's a mistake, I think, quite a big mistake, because we are physical beings as well as potentially at least spiritual beings. And enlightenment happens in the body. When the Buddha got enlightened, he didn't leave his body. He remained in his body to the end of his life. That's why there's a big emphasis these days, and I think it's a good emphasis on the whole, on meditating in the body, being aware of your body before you start any particular meditations, and even during the meditation, remaining in the body. So it's not a matter of going somewhere else. So I think I think people often do think of the spiritual life in that way, and there are spiritual traditions who make that very explicit. There were the Cathars, weren't there? The particular Christian sect who taught that the problem with life is the body, and you have to get out of the body. The soul needs to be freed from the body, and therefore anything of the body is bad. So anything that's really pleasant with the body, like eating nice food and having sex and laying on the beach in the sunshine, that's a bad thing. But I don't think Buddhism considers it, well, Buddhism, some Buddhists probably do think that, but I certainly don't. And I don't think it's a widespread idea. Yeah. And I know Sanghadhara doesn't think that either.
Yeah.
Should we have another question?
You know.
Or do you want to say some more? Another question, maybe, Vijaypala, if there is one.
Well, I've got a question actually. How do you create more enjoyment in your spiritual life? I'd be interested to hear that. You've been talking about enjoyment.
More what?
Enjoyment.
You'd be a good one to answer that one, Sanghadhara. You're often enjoying your life, aren't you? When you're not frozen.
That's right. How do I? I don't know. I think I'm actually, when I asked myself the question earlier when you were talking, Ratnaguna, about some people are more pleasure principle, another was it truth, the truth,
reality,
the reality principle.
Yeah.
I did struggle to place myself. I had a good friend of mine talks of him, Bodhiketu. He says he's a kind of like the ultimate hedonist. He engages with the spiritual life as kind of the ultimate hedonist, because there is something just inherently joyful on the pleasures of meditation, or for me it's more like friendship and studying or wisdom. There's something of talking about reality or ethics that is inherently pleasurable, actually. I mean, I'm really enjoying this conversation, for instance. So it's just kind of putting myself in situations that bring about this kind of satisfaction. I think that's one. Putting myself in situations where I can have good conversations. That's why I live with other Buddhists. I put myself in situations where I have to try to communicate Buddhism and the truth, because it makes me think about it and puts me in relationship with other people who are also looking for it. And that in itself is enjoyable. Very often I'm not very happy, or I don't even fancy going to the Buddhist center. But after I've been, it's quite enjoyable. So yeah, like I say, putting myself in situations where I'll be more exposed to the Dharma or an inquiry in search for the truth, I suppose. I guess I'd say by temperament, I think I'm actually quite a happy person. I think people have different, just probably how the brain works, and probably my brain naturally produces more happy hormones.
Yeah. Happy hormones, yeah. Well, mine doesn't, you see. So I'm naturally depressive.
All right, what do you do?
Yeah, so I learned the hard way, because I've been a Buddhist for a long time now, a few decades. And the first couple of decades, I didn't pay enough attention to enjoyment and pleasure. Or I thought I was enjoying my life, or I wasn't completely. And I had to come to terms with that later on. I hit a brick wall, basically, metaphorically a brick wall. And so then I had to sort of stop, and I left for a while, and then I sort of came back on a different basis. So I've thought quite a bit about this. And it seems to me absolutely essential that you enjoy living the spiritual life. And part of that is learning who you really are, the kind of person you really are. Nearly all Buddhists meditate, right? So the first thing you're taught really is to meditate, and then we think of Buddhists as meditators. So then the question arises: what if you don't really like meditation? Are you not really a Buddhist, or do you have to do it anyway, even though you're not enjoying it? And I learned over the last few decades, I've learned that there are certain aspects of the spiritual life that work for me, and I'm very happy doing, like conversing with people about the Dharma, and not only the Dharma in the narrow sense, but things that matter, meaningful things. I like that. I like writing. I like thinking. I like listening to music. I see that as a Dharma practice, actually listening to music. So I've learned what works for me, and I just keep doing them. And so I'm very happy these days. But when I was trying to do the things that didn't seem to work for me, it didn't always lead to happiness. and pleasure. And I realized the hard way that if you don't have any pleasure in the spiritual life, you'll just have to stop one day. It won't be sustaining, you know. Yeah. Is that enough, Vijaypala, on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. There's actually a question that kind of neatly follows up on that, which is someone's asking, well, they're saying that the Buddha was completely relentless in his quest for enlightenment. He set the bar really high. How do we know when we've done enough?
Yeah. It's really dangerous, I think, to compare yourself with the Buddha, because he was an extraordinary man. You'd have to be extraordinary to become enlightened on your own steam. You know, it's hard enough to do when you've got teachers and friends helping you, but all on your own, it's really hard. So I never, ever compare myself with the Buddha, because if I did, I'd become depressed. So I don't do that. I'm just really glad that the Buddha lived and he discovered enlightenment and taught it, which means ordinary people like me, and I do regard myself as quite an ordinary person, we can benefit from it. So I see it more that I'm just benefiting from the Buddha's towering example, which I can't follow, no way. But I think another thing is not to sort of, I think some people think in terms of the spiritual life, which aren't very helpful. One of them is comparing oneself to others. And the Buddha actually said that, don't compare yourself with others. It doesn't lead anywhere good. So don't compare yourself with the Buddha or any spiritual teacher. I don't think it works. I was going to say something else there, but because I'm 66 years old, I've forgotten it.
Are you 66?
66, yeah.
Wow.
And it often happens to me, I'm talking, and halfway through a sentence, before I've got to the thing I really want to talk about, I'm leading up to it. By the time I get there, I've forgotten what it is. And that happened just now. There was something important I was going to say, and it's gone out the window.
But that happens to me, and I'm 32, so I have no idea how I'm going to be like then.
Don't think about it. Have you got anything more to say about that question, Sanghadhara, than I have? You can remember it.
Yeah, I was actually. I did have something. I just distracted myself. What was it? I just thought actually the Buddha also said, well, I've said something that Sangharashta said first, which is, he said something like the Buddha should change. If you're a Buddhist, you should change at least a little bit every day. So you could feel like they should as a kind of quite a high pressure, relentless thing. But you can also put an emphasis on a little bit. And I think this is other, the Dhammapada, the Buddha says something like, just like a pot would fill up drop by drop, one could, I can't remember what it follows, but something like one can develop compassion and mindfulness and spiritual and positive emotions, that kind of stuff, drop by drop.
Yeah.
So I think rather than, because sometimes I think that enlightenment or transformation can sound so big, you know, it's like at the moment I'm black and I want to be white, or, you know, or the other way around, or, you know, so I want to, I'm ignorant and I want to be completely wise now. While actually it's more of the path of his regular steps and slow, perhaps, progression. So I think how I relate with it is just like, as far as I can see that I'm becoming more integrated, I'll have a bit of a broader awareness in more positive mental states than before, you know, leaving bad habits behind, cultivating good habits. And so, yeah, it's more of a, rather than seeing it as a tireless thing, it's just something that I'll do on the long run. So yeah, rather than see a big change to the point that will be enough, to just say, I'm actually just gonna continue doing the good stuff that has good results, for the benefit of all beings. Yeah, something like that. That's what I was thinking. Because in some ways, like, it will never be enough. Actually, it will never be enough. Even if I wake up to the truth of things, that will not mean that I'll stop altogether everything. And it doesn't mean that all humans will be free from COVID-19 and everything else. So I think it's also coming to terms that, well, you know, it's never going to be enough. But that doesn't mean that what I do is not worth doing.
Perhaps we could add to that you can be in the kind of Buddhist that you want to be. I mean, you know, some people, they're very intense and very earnest, and they want to know that they're a proper Buddhist kind of thing. So if the Buddha did that, I should do that too. But you don't have to. You can be the kind of Buddhist you want to be. There's something that really amused me a few years ago. The actor Jeff Bridges, he was interviewed in the Tricycle magazine, which is a Buddhist magazine. And after a while, the interviewer said, "So, seems like you're a Buddhist, are you?" He said, "I would describe myself as a Buddhistically inclined lazy guy." And I thought that was just so good. I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like me. Yeah. Okay. It's 7 minutes to 4. Should we have another question, if there is any?
There's no further questions. I wonder if you've got any final thoughts before we end.
Probably we can find something in our brains.
I could ask you one question.
Ask me a question.
Yeah. What if there's a quality, or what quality of Gautama, pre-enlightenment, Gautama, would you like to have more, or you aspire to, or inspires you? Kind of
that's a good question. That's interesting, because there's a quality that I've already mentioned of his that I really, really like, and I think I've probably got some of that quality already. So it's like the path of least resistance, and that's his inquiring mind. You know, does that work when I do that? Does that really work? Something I've developed over the last 20 years, which I really like. But if I were to say there's a quality of the Buddha had that I don't have very much at all, and therefore I should try to develop, it's his the one that was mentioned earlier, his absolutely unflinching, unstinting determination to gain enlightenment. I don't have that at all. It will probably be good if I did have it a bit more than I do. But yeah, that's an amazing quality of his that, you know, probably not many people do have, actually. And he needed that quality in order to gain enlightenment all on his own kind of thing. So he had it in spades. Really remarkable man. And so I'm going to turn the question over back to you now, Sanghadhara. Of the Buddha's quality, which one, etc., etc.
I feared that would happen as soon as I finished the question. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I have an answer.
Boomerang effect.
It happens every time. So I have listening, have thinking. And I think it's, yeah, something to do with that. Almost kind of, the first thing I thought was not just bravery or something, but it was that kind of strife, that kind of, there was something very authentic, I suppose, or very like he moved on from situations that weren't as favorable to situations that would deepen that inquiring mind, or that quest. So it's more like that kind of, that determination and that the energy or something behind it. It's just the kind of requires a lot of I suppose clarity, but also that impulse. I keep doing this. I don't know what it is.
Right. Yeah.
There's just that push or something, that
Yeah.
energy.
So in a way, we both mentioned the same one, but there's another one of his qualities which we haven't mentioned, which I'd like to end with, because I think you have that quality in quite a big degree yourself. He was so friendly. Reading the Buddhist text, what becomes really obvious about the Buddha when he was the Buddha, and probably the same before he was the Buddha, he was really friendly with people, always meeting people, going out of his way to meet people and inquiring into them. He had a very inquiring mind as regards other people too. And I know you're known for that in our Buddhist movement. I was at your 30th birthday party on Zoom. And there was all these people saying, what a brilliant guy you are, how friendly and so on. And so I think, the Buddha would have been like you in that respect, sort of really friendly and outward going and open and so on. It would have been just a joy to meet him, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Also, I do think it's also something I have cultivated, and it's thanks to my friendships. I do think, and I meet that with you as well. When you ask for clarification, it kind of comes with that inquiry, I suppose, that curiosity. But I think that also extends from you to other people, not just to ideas and the Dharma. But I think you draw people out, and definitely something that I noticed through friendships that I have with, like Dharmshalin, I can think of a good friend of mine, Suvasha as well, that people were with their interest in me and draw me out. And it's something I kind of try to cultivate and still, try to listen to people and try to listen deeper, not just to what they're saying, what's behind what they're saying, and help that draw out. Because I have benefited by that, and but also takes me other places. But the Buddha definitely had
you're
that.
Now making me think of a very famous thing that the Buddha said: spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. But we haven't got time to talk about that now. But the way you spoke about it, we could have drawn a lot out of that to show how true that is. But maybe we can do that tomorrow when we talk about the Buddha as the Buddha.
Maybe.
If we remember his friendliness. Yeah. And that takes us up to 1 minute to 4, everybody. So I wish I could see you. I don't know what you look like, how many of you are, whether you're smiling or not, but thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. And thank you, Ratnaguna. Thank you, Vidyapala, in the background, that disembodied voice hosting us.